I was standing in the back of my father's wedding reception, holding a paper cup of weak coffee, when he lifted his champagne glass, looked straight at me, and said to a room full of smiling guests, "Some people never learn their place. She's nothing but a bastard child." The whole banquet hall went silent. You could hear forks touch china. You could hear the soft hum of the air conditioner above the dance floor. You could hear my own breath catch so hard it hurt. Then he placed his hand on the shoulder of the blonde woman beside him, his daughter from his second marriage, dressed in pale blue silk pearls at her throat, polished as a department store mannequin, and said with a proud grin, "But this is my real daughter. My pride, my legacy." I should have walked out then. Lord knows I wanted to. But before I could move, the blonde woman turned her head and saw me clearly for the first time. Her smile vanished. The color drained from her face. One hand flew to her mouth. "Oh my God," she whispered. Then louder, with a sharp, frightened gasp that cut through the room, she cried, "Oh my God, she is my—" And that was the moment everything changed. But to understand why, you have to understand who I was before that day. Or maybe more truthfully, who I had been told I was all my life. My name is June Whittaker. I was 62 years old that spring, living alone in a tidy ranch house outside Dayton, Ohio, with 2 rose bushes out front, and a kitchen clock that had belonged to my mother. I had retired after 34 years as a public school secretary, and most of my days had become pleasantly ordinary. Morning coffee, a walk if the weather held, church on Sundays, phone calls with old friends, library books stacked by my recliner. It wasn't an exciting life, but it was a decent one, earned, quiet, honest. The kind of life my mother had taught me to build with my own 2 hands. My father, on the other hand, had spent his whole life building appearances. His name was Robert Harlan. In Greene County, people knew that name. He owned car dealerships for years, served on boards, donated money where it could be seen, and wore expensive suits like armor. He had that kind of voice men mistake for authority, and women once mistook for charm. He could shake your hand and make you feel chosen or dismissed without changing his expression. By the time I was born in 1964, he was already engaged to somebody else. My mother, Louise Whittaker, never hid that from me. She told me the truth in plain language once I was old enough to bear it. She had been young. She had loved the wrong man. He had promised things he never intended to keep. And when she told him she was pregnant, he did what men like him have always done. He stepped back, adjusted his tie, and protected his good name. I grew up with my mother's last name and my father's silence. Still, silence can have a voice in a small town. It follows you through grocery stores and school hallways. It slips into church pews and PTA meetings. It settles in the pause after someone asks, "Now whose girl are you again?" I learned early how people looked at my mother. Some pitied her, some judged her, a few admired her, though they rarely said it loud enough to matter. She worked harder than anyone I've ever known. Waitressing at the diner before sunrise, cleaning houses in the afternoon, mending clothes at night for extra money. She smelled like ivory soap, frying bacon and cold cream. Her hands were rough, but when she touched my cheek, she was gentleness itself. She never let me call myself unwanted. Unclaimed is not the same as unwanted, she used to say while folding laundry at our kitchen table. Don't you ever confuse a man's weakness with your worth. I carried those words like scripture. And yet children are cruel in ways adults pretend not to notice. In 6th grade, a boy named Tommy Welch asked in front of the whole class if I was the girl whose daddy sneaked away. In 9th grade, somebody wrote "bastard" on the inside of my locker with red marker. I scrubbed at it so hard the skin came off 2 fingers. When I was 17, I wrote my father a letter. Just one. I told him I didn't want money. I didn't want his name. I only wanted to meet him once and ask him why. Why had he left my mother to explain everything? Why had he never once come to see whether I had his eyes or his laugh or his bad knees? Why had he decided I could carry his shame all by myself? 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived. Inside was a check for $200 and a note from his lawyer. Mr. Harlan considers this matter closed. No signature from him, no explanation, just those 6 words. My mother tore the check in half before I could touch it. That should have been the end of him in my life. In most ways it was. I graduated, found work, stayed close to home, and built a life with people who chose me freely. but blood is a strange thing. Even when it gives you nothing, it can still ache. So when the invitation came 6 weeks before the wedding, I stared at it like it might burn my fingers. Robert Harlan and Vivian Mercer request the honor of your presence. No personal note, no apology, just embossed cream cardstock, expensive and cold. Tucked inside was a smaller card for the reception at the Willow Creek Lodge in Xenia. At first I assumed it had been sent by mistake. Then I thought maybe age had softened him. Maybe a third marriage at 81 had finally forced him to think about the wreckage behind him. Maybe he wanted to make peace before it was too late. I hated myself a little for even considering that. At 62, a woman ought to know better than to expect decency from a man who spent half a century withholding it. I took the invitation to my friend Darlene, who had known me since high school. We sat at her kitchen table over tuna sandwiches while rain tapped the windows. "You don't owe him one blessed thing," she said, pushing her glasses up. "But if you go, don't go for him. Go for you." That sentence stayed with me. Go for you. Not to beg, not to accuse, not to make a scene, just to stand in a room where I had always been denied a place and prove to myself that I could survive it. So on the afternoon of the wedding, I put on my best navy dress, the one with the modest lace sleeves. I pinned on my mother's pearl brooch. I curled my hair, dabbed on lipstick, and drove 28 miles with both hands tight on the steering wheel. The Willow Creek Lodge was decorated in soft white flowers and battery candles. Everything looked tasteful in that expensive, careful way people use when they want elegance to disguise vanity. Most of the guests were country club polished men in sport coats, women with salon hair and bracelets that chimed when they laughed. I recognized almost nobody, but a few recognized me. I saw it in their faces. The pause. The memory. The quiet calculation, so that's her. I kept to the back during the ceremony. No one greeted me. No one asked if I needed a seat closer up. I told myself that was fine. I had not come for hospitality. I had come for the truth, whatever shape it took. Then came the reception. The toast. The champagne. My father standing under a rented crystal chandelier with his new bride beaming beside him and his second daughter shining at his elbow. And then his eyes found me. Even now I can still see the slow curl of his mouth before he raised that glass. I can still hear the words, "She's nothing but a bastard child." And I can still see the shock on that younger woman's face as she turned, stared right at me and screamed, "Oh my God, she is my..." Part 1. The humiliation word, count, 1035. Continue. I didn't know whether to breathe or brace myself. The room held its silence like a fragile glass about to shatter. Every eye flickered between the young woman in blue and me as if we were suddenly the center of some truth no one had been prepared to witness. My father's smile faltered just slightly, but I saw it. After all these years, I had learned to read even the smallest cracks in him. "Clara," he said sharply, his voice dropping half a tone. "That's enough." So her name was Clara. She didn't look at him. Her eyes were locked on mine like she had just seen a ghost walk into the room. Not fear exactly, but recognition. Something deeper, something unsettling. I had never seen her before in my life. And yet, in that moment, I felt something twist inside me. Not connection, not yet, but a strange, hollow echo. The shape of something unspoken. She took a step toward me. "Where did you..." She began, her voice trembling, then stopped herself. Her hand tightened around her clutch purse like she needed something to hold on to. My father stepped forward, placing himself between us just enough to interrupt the line of sight. "That's quite enough," he said louder now, forcing a polite chuckle that didn't quite land. "Family matters can be complicated. Let's not ruin a happy occasion with unnecessary dramatics." Unnecessary. That word hung in the air like an insult dressed up as manners. I set my paper cup down on the nearest table before I dropped it. My hands had started to shake, and I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing that. "I didn't come here to cause trouble," I said, my voice quieter than his but steadier than I expected. A few heads turned, a few whispers started. He looked at me the way a man looks at something he wishes would disappear on command. "Well," he replied, adjusting his cufflink, "that's a relief, because you've already made quite enough of an impression." There it was again, that careful cruelty, always wrapped in civility, always polished enough that anyone who didn't know better might miss the blade. Clara stepped around him. Dad, stop, she said, her voice firmer now. Just stop. That one word, Dad, hit me harder than anything he had said all evening. I had never once called him that out loud. She turned back to me, searching my face like she was trying to solve a puzzle she didn't want to understand. Can we talk? She asked. The room leaned in. My father did not like losing control of a room. Clara, he warned low and tight, you're upsetting your stepmother. Vivian stood frozen beside him, her smile stiff as porcelain. She didn't say a word. She didn't need to. Women like her knew when to stay quiet. Clara didn't even glance at her. I need to speak with her, she said, alone. I should have said no. I should have walked out of that hall with what little dignity I had left intact and never looked back. But there was something in her eyes. Something unfinished. And after 62 years of being denied answers, I wasn't about to turn away from one that might finally be offered, even if it came from a stranger in a blue dress. All right, I said. We stepped out onto the back patio, away from the murmurs and the music that had started up again too quickly, like nothing had happened. The evening air was cool. The sky had that soft Ohio twilight purple fading into navy. Somewhere beyond the trees, a cricket started its slow, steady rhythm. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she turned to me. You're June Whittaker, she said. It wasn't a question. I felt my spine straighten just a little. Yes. She exhaled slowly, like that answer had confirmed something she'd been afraid of. I knew it, she whispered. I didn't think... She pressed her fingers to her forehead, eyes closing briefly. I'm sorry, she said quickly. This must feel God, I don't even know what this feels like for you. I almost laughed. You'd be surprised what a person can get used to, I said. She nodded, but her expression didn't settle. If anything, it grew more troubled. I've been looking into our family records, she said carefully. Not just for fun, for health reasons. There were things that didn't add up. That word didn't slip past me. What things? I asked. She hesitated. My mother, she began, then corrected herself, the woman who raised me, Vivian, she always said I was born early, that there were complications, but the dates never quite matched. Not when I started digging. A slow, uneasy feeling crept through me. And then I found something, she continued. An old document. A hospital record from Dayton. It listed a different name. Not hers. My chest tightened. What name, I asked, though part of me already knew. She swallowed. Louise Whittaker. The world didn't tilt dramatically. It didn't spin or blur like it does in movies. It just narrowed. Everything else, the crickets, the music, the hum of voices inside, fell away until there was only that name hanging between us. My mother. That's not possible, I said automatically, even as my pulse began to race. I thought so too, Clara replied. At first. But then I started comparing dates, birth certificates. There were inconsistencies. Enough that I couldn't ignore them. She stepped closer. My birthday is October 12th, 1965, she said. I didn't need to think. My mother was pregnant again that year, I said slowly. But she told me. I stopped. What had she told me? That she had lost the baby. That there had been complications. That it was better not to talk about it. I had accepted that as truth for over 4 decades. Clara's eyes filled with something that looked a lot like fear. I don't think I'm just your half-sister, she said. The air between us went still. I think, she whispered, I think I'm your sister. Not half. Not second. Just sister. My mind struggled to catch up. That would mean, I began. That he didn't just abandon your mother, she said, her voice breaking. It would mean he took me. I stared at her. No, I said immediately. No, he wouldn't. But even as the words left my mouth, I heard how weak they sounded. Because I knew what he would do. I had lived my whole life shaped by his decisions. Clara shook her head, tears slipping down now. I don't know all of it, she said. Not yet. But I know enough to say something's very wrong. And when I saw you tonight... She let out a shaky breath. You look like her. Like the pictures I found. My legs felt unsteady, so I reached back and gripped the edge of the patio railing. For 62 years I had believed my story was simple. Painful, yes, but clear. A man had left. A woman had endured. A child had grown up in the space between. Now that story was cracking open. You're saying, I said slowly, carefully, that my father didn't just walk away from my mother, but might have taken her second child and raised her as his own with another woman. Clara nodded, her face pale. Yes. Inside the lodge, laughter rose again, too loud, too forced. A wedding continuing as if nothing had shifted. But everything had. I looked back through the glass doors at the man who had just called me nothing in front of a room full of witnesses. And for the first time in my life, I realized something with perfect clarity. This wasn't just about rejection anymore. This was about truth. And truth, I had learned from my mother, has a way of finding its way to the surface no matter how long it's been buried. I straightened, letting go of the railing. Then we're going to find out, I said. Clara looked at me, hope and fear tangled together in her expression. Yes, she whispered. And somewhere deep inside me, something that had been quiet for decades finally stirred. Not anger, not yet, but something sharper. Resolve. Because if what she was saying was true, then my father hadn't just denied me. He had stolen something far greater. Part 2. A Child Left Behind. Word count. 1042. Continue. That night, after the guests finally began drifting back toward the bar, and the DJ turned up the music to smother the tension, Clara and I did not go back inside together. She said she needed a few minutes before anyone noticed she was gone too long. I said I needed air, though what I really needed was a way to stand upright under the weight of what she had just told me. So I walked to my car and sat behind the wheel without starting the engine. The parking lot lights cast everything in that flat yellow glow that makes the world look tired. My hands rested on the steering wheel, but I wasn't seeing it. I was seeing my mother in our old kitchen on Linden Avenue, standing at the sink in a faded blue house dress, her shoulders tight in a way I had never understood as a child. I was seeing the little white crib that had sat in the corner of her room for a few weeks before quietly disappearing. I was hearing things I had not thought about in years, fragments, pauses, the half-truths people tell when the whole truth feels too dangerous. My mother had once been pregnant again. That much I knew. I had been only 1 year old, maybe a little older when it happened, so I didn't remember it directly. But by the time I was 10 or 11, I had pieced together enough to ask questions. Children do that. We sense where the silence is thickest, and we poke at it. I remembered one summer evening when I was about 12, sitting at the table snapping green beans while my mother cooked supper. The fan in the window pushed warm air around, and the radio was playing Patsy Cline low in the background. Did I ever have a baby brother or sister, I had asked. She froze for the smallest second. Then she went right back to slicing onions. There was another pregnancy, she said, but it didn't work out. I remember pressing, "You mean the baby died?" Her knife kept moving. I mean, some things aren't for children to carry. That was all she gave me. Back then, I thought it was grief. Maybe it was. But now, sitting in my car at 62, I wondered whether it had also been fear. I drove home in silence. No radio. No comforting late-night host talking about gardening or weather or old records. Just the hum of the tires and my own thoughts circling like crows. When I got inside, I kicked off my shoes, set my purse on the kitchen counter, and stood there staring at my mother's clock. It was 10:47 p.m. I poured myself a glass of water and drank half of it in one swallow, then sat down at the table. For a long time I did nothing. Then I got up and went to the hall closet. On the top shelf sat a cardboard box I hadn't opened in over a year. My mother's things. Not everything, just the small pieces I couldn't bring myself to sort through properly. Letters, church programs, old recipes clipped from newspapers, snapshots, a few legal papers, hospital bills, birthday cards. A life in fragments. I carried the box to the table and opened it. The smell hit me first, that faint, dry paper scent mixed with something floral from an old sachet that had long since lost its strength. I started carefully lifting one envelope at a time. Christmas cards from women at church. Utility receipts. A photograph of me in pigtails on the first day of 3rd grade. A faded grocery list with Milk Eggs coffee detergent written in my mother's neat hand. Then, near the bottom, I found a rubber-banded stack of papers I didn't recognize. Medical forms. Hospital billing statements. A discharge summary from St. Anne's in Dayton. My heart began to pound so hard I could hear it. I sat down again and read slowly, line by line, because my eyes were not what they used to be, and because I was suddenly terrified of seeing what I was looking for. Patient, Louise Whitaker. Admission date, October 10, 1965. Procedure notes: delivery complications. Infant female live birth. Live birth. Not miscarriage, not stillbirth, not it didn't work out. A live birth. I pressed my hand flat against the paper to steady it. There were more pages underneath, some incomplete. One had portions blacked out with what looked like old marker. Another was a billing notice marked paid in full by a law office I recognized instantly. Harlan and Pike. My father's attorney. I leaned back in my chair so suddenly it scraped the floor. For a while I just stared at the wall, at the little crack in the paint near the pantry door, at the calendar hanging crooked beside the refrigerator, at the plainness of my kitchen while the entire shape of my life quietly rearranged itself. Clara had been right, or at least close enough to terrify me. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my mother's face and wondered what she had endured that I had never known. Whether she had held that baby even once. Whether someone had told her there was no choice. Whether she had signed something under pressure or cried until she could not cry anymore, or spent years swallowing down a grief too complicated to explain. And maybe hardest of all, I wondered whether she had kept it from me to protect me or because she could not bear to say the words out loud. By morning I knew one thing for certain. I could not leave it alone. At 8:30 I called Clara. She answered on the second ring, her voice hoarse like she hadn't slept either. "I was hoping you'd call," she said. "I found records," I told her. Silence. Then a sharp inhale. "What kind of records?" "Hospital papers. My mother gave birth to a live baby girl in October of 1965. When I said it aloud, it became more real than I was ready for." Clara exhaled shakily. "Then it's true." "It's possible," I said, because some part of me still needed caution. "But yes, more possible than I ever imagined." She was quiet for a moment, then said, "Can we meet?" We chose a diner halfway between my house and hers, one of those old-fashioned places with cracked vinyl booths, endless coffee and waitresses who still call you honey without sounding fake. When I arrived, Clara was already there in a cream cardigan and no makeup, looking younger and more fragile than she had the night before. Weddings and pearls had suited her less than honesty did. She stood when she saw me. For 1 second we simply looked at each other. Then she said softly, "You really do look like her." I sat down across from her, my mother. She nodded. I found 2 photographs in an old file box in my father's study. He must have forgotten they were there. One was of her holding a toddler, probably you. The other, she swallowed, the other was of her in a hospital bed. A waitress brought coffee before either of us could say more. We thanked her, waited until she walked off, then leaned in. Clara opened her purse and slid a folded paper across the table. It was a copy of her birth certificate. I looked at the names. Father Robert Harlan, Mother Vivian Mercer Harlan. But the issue date was months later than the birth itself. Amended. Not original. I lifted my eyes to hers. "She wasn't even married to him yet," Clara said quietly. "Vivian and my father didn't marry until spring of 1966. I checked. I sat back, the pieces settling into place with sickening logic. My father had not simply rebuilt his life after abandoning my mother. He had rewritten it. And somewhere in that rewriting, 2 sisters had been split apart, one raised in public, polished and praised, the other left in the shadows to carry the shame. I wrapped both hands around my coffee cup, though I had no intention of drinking it. All these years I said I thought my revenge would be telling him what he did to me. Clara looked at me steadily. "But this is bigger than me," I said. "Yes," she whispered, "it is." And for the first time in my life I understood that I wasn't walking back toward my father's world as a rejected daughter begging to be seen. I was walking toward him with evidence. Part 3. Building a life without him. Word count 1040. Continue. By the time Clara and I finished our coffee, neither of us was the same woman who had walked into that diner. There is something about truth, real truth, that doesn't just sit beside you politely. It moves in. It rearranges furniture. It opens drawers you forgot existed and leaves them hanging open for you to deal with. We paid the bill, stepped out into the late morning light, and stood for a moment beside our cars like we weren't quite ready to separate. "What do we do next?" Clara asked. It was a simple question. It didn't feel like a simple answer. "We verify everything I said. We don't go on assumptions. We don't confront him until we have more than just suspicion." She nodded. There's a records office at St. Anne's. I already called this morning. They said anything that old would be archived, but I can submit a request. I'll go with you, I said without thinking. Something flickered across her face, not relief exactly, but something close to it. Okay, she said. We agreed to meet the next morning. That afternoon I went back to the box. Not because I wanted to relive anything, but because I knew now that my mother had left me more than memories. She had left me pieces of a story she hadn't been able to tell out loud. I found more papers I hadn't understood before. A receipt from a lawyer. A handwritten note with only a date and the word agreement. And at the very bottom, tucked into an envelope with no return address, a single sheet of paper that had been folded so many times, the creases were soft as cloth. It wasn't addressed to me. It wasn't even signed. But it was in my mother's handwriting. I don't agree, but I don't have a choice. You said this would give her a better life. You said I could still see her. You said you wouldn't take both of them from me. Please don't make me regret believing you. My hand started to tremble again. Not from shock this time. From something colder. Betrayal. Not mine, hers. And suddenly my father's words from the night before, she's nothing but a bastard child, didn't just feel cruel. They felt calculated. Because if what I was beginning to understand was true, then he hadn't just erased me. He had divided us. I folded the paper carefully and set it beside the hospital records. That night I didn't sit in silence. I made a list. Names, dates, places, questions. If my father had built his life on a version of the truth that suited him, then I was going to take it apart piece by piece. Not with shouting, not with spectacle, but with facts. The next morning, Clara met me in the parking lot of St. Anne's Hospital. It looked smaller than I remembered, older, like time had pressed gently but firmly against it. The brick was faded, the sign slightly worn, but it was still standing. Ready, she asked. No, I said honestly. Then I opened the door anyway. Inside, the air smelled like antiseptic and old tile. The lobby had been renovated at some point, but there were still traces of the past in the corners, hallways that hadn't changed, lighting that felt a decade behind the quiet hum of a place that had seen more than it ever said. We checked in at records. A young man behind the desk looked barely old enough to understand what we were asking for, but he was polite. He took our forms, glanced at the dates, and raised his eyebrows slightly. 1965, he said. That might take a little time. We'll wait, I said. So we did. For nearly 2 hours, we sat in a row of plastic chairs, saying very little. Clara tapped her foot. I watched the clock. Every now and then, one of us would glance at the other as if to confirm we were still in this together. Finally, the young man returned carrying a thin file folder. I found something, he said. My chest tightened. He set the folder on the counter but didn't open it. I do need to let you know, he added, that records from that period are sometimes incomplete, and certain details may have been amended or restricted. Amended, Clara repeated quietly. He gave a small apologetic shrug. It happened more often back then than people like to admit. I stepped forward. May we see it, I asked. He nodded. When he opened the folder, the first thing I saw was my mother's name again. Louise Whitaker. Then a second name. Infant A. And below that, Infant B. I felt the air leave my lungs. Twins, Clara whispered. The word hung between us like something sacred and devastating. 2 infants. 2 girls. Born the same day. One labeled released to mother. The other, I leaned closer. The other line had been partially redacted, but enough remained to understand. Released under private arrangement. Clara covered her mouth. Oh my God, she breathed. I didn't speak. Because in that moment, everything became clear in a way that left no room for doubt. My mother hadn't lost a baby. She had lost a daughter. And my father, he hadn't just abandoned us. He had chosen one. The room around me seemed to shrink. I could feel something rising in my chest, something I had held back for over 60 years, not just anger, but something sharper, something steadier. Clarity. I looked at Clara, at my sister. Not half. Not maybe. But truly. And I saw in her face the same realization taking root. He separated us, she said, her voice breaking. He decided which child belonged in his life, and which one didn't. I nodded slowly. Yes. We stood there in silence for a moment longer, absorbing the weight of it. Then Clara asked the question I had already answered in my mind. What do we do now? I closed the file carefully. We stop wondering, I said. And we start confronting. Because for the first time in my life, I wasn't walking into that confrontation as a woman hoping to be acknowledged. I was walking in as someone who already knew the truth. And there is a kind of power in that no man, no matter how careful or cruel, can take away. Part 4. The Secret Revealed Word Count, 1041. Continue. We did not drive straight to my father's house. That would have been the younger version of me, the hurt girl, the one who still confused urgency with power. But age, if it gives you nothing else, gives you a better understanding of timing. And I had not survived 62 years of silence just to arrive at the truth breathless and unprepared. So Clara came back to my house instead. I spread the papers across my kitchen table beneath the afternoon light. The hospital record, the amended birth certificate, my mother's note, the legal receipt from Harlan and Pike. It looked less like a family history than an evidence board. Every document carried the same quiet accusation. Not rumor, not suspicion, proof. Clara stood over the table with both hands braced against the wood. I still can't believe she never told me, she said softly. I looked up. Vivian. She nodded, if she knew. That if mattered. I had spent most of my life imagining the women around my father as willing participants in his version of things. Stylish, comfortable, protected by his money and his name. But truth has a way of making villains and victims less simple than we want them to be. She may not have known everything I said, or she may have known enough to survive and no more than that. Clara pulled out a chair and sat down. That doesn't excuse it. No, I said, it doesn't. She looked at the papers again, then at me. What was your mother like? She asked. The question caught me off guard, not because I couldn't answer it, but because no one connected to my father had ever asked. I sat down across from her. She was tired a lot, I said after a moment. Not in a weak way, in a hard-working way. The kind of tired that comes from carrying more than one person should have to carry, and deciding every morning to do it again anyway. Clara listened without interrupting. She had a laugh that surprised people. I continued. When it came all the way. Head back, eyes squeezed shut. And she had this way of making a place feel clean and safe, even if it was small. Even if money was tight. She ironed pillowcases. Can you imagine that, pillowcases? Said a person slept better when things were cared for. Clara smiled through tears. That sounds nice, she whispered. It was, I said. She loved fiercely. Quietly but fiercely. The room went still again. Then Clara asked, do you think she wanted to find me? I didn't answer immediately. Because I knew the truth or part of it. I had her note. I had the evidence that promises had been made to her and broken. But wanting and being able are not the same thing. Women of my mother's generation knew that better than anybody. I think I said carefully that she never stopped carrying you. Clara lowered her eyes. A tear slipped down and she wiped it away almost impatiently, like she was embarrassed by it. I understood that too. Some kinds of grief arrive late and still expect room to sit down. By 5 o'clock we had decided not to call ahead. No warnings, no chances for my father to rearrange the furniture of the truth before we walked in. His house sat on the edge of a golf course outside Beaver Creek, a large brick colonial with white columns and a front lawn so exact it looked measured. I had only seen it once before from the street years ago. Standing in the driveway now, I felt the old shame stir in me out of habit, but only out of habit. It no longer belonged there. Clara reached for the passenger door handle, then paused. He'll lie, she said. Yes, I replied. He'll try to divide us. Yes. She looked at me. Then don't let me lose my nerve. I held her gaze. Don't you lose mine either. We went to the door together, Vivian answered. She looked smaller than she had at the wedding, though that may have been because she wasn't dressed for an audience. Beige slacks, a soft sweater, no pearls. Her hair was neatly set, but her face had the look of a woman who hadn't slept. Her eyes moved from Clara to me, and the color drained from them. Clara, she said slowly, what is this? My sister's voice was calm in a way that reminded me of myself. We need to speak with Dad. Vivian's hand tightened on the edge of the door. This is not the time. It's exactly the time I said. At that, she looked at me directly for the first time. Not with contempt, not even with disdain. With fear. That told me more than any greeting could have. Before she could answer, my father's voice came from somewhere deeper in the house. Who is it? Then he appeared in the hallway, still in slacks and a button-down sleeves, rolled reading glasses in one hand. The picture of domestic authority. Until he saw us. His whole body went rigid for a fraction of a second. It was the smallest thing. Most people would have missed it. I didn't. June, he said flatly, I believe you've made enough of a spectacle already. No, I replied, that was you. Clara stepped inside without waiting to be invited. I followed. Vivian moved aside automatically, still pale. My father set his glasses on the console table with exaggerated care. I will not have hysterics in my home. I almost smiled at that. Hysterics. The word men use when facts arrive wearing a woman's face. Clara laid the file on the entry table and opened it. No speeches, no warm-up. Just paper. His eyes dropped to the hospital record first, then the birth certificate, then my mother's note. For the first time in my life, I watched Robert Harlan run out of expressions. Vivian stared at the table. What is that? No one answered her. I stepped forward. 2 girls were born to Louise Whitaker in October of 1965, I said. One was released to her. The other was placed under a private arrangement. Clara's amended records were issued after your marriage. The law office that paid the hospital bill was yours. My father looked at Clara, not me. You had no right to go digging through private records. There it was. Not denial. Not first. Violation. Because guilty people often complain about the door, not the fire. Clara's face hardened. So it's true. He drew himself up, reaching for indignation like an old coat. You don't understand the circumstances. No, I said. Why don't you explain them? His jaw tightened. Vivian sank slowly onto a chair in the sitting room just off the foyer. Robert, she said faintly, what are they talking about? Still, he didn't look at her. Instead, he looked at me the way he had at the wedding, except now the superiority was cracking. Your mother was unstable, he said. She couldn't manage 2 infants. I made arrangements. I felt something inside me go cold as stone. Arrangements, I repeated. It was for the best. For whom? Clara asked sharply. He ignored her. She had no means, he continued. No husband. No future worth speaking of. I gave one child a proper home. I stared at him. The cruelty of it was almost breathtaking, not because it was loud, but because it was so ordinary to him, so reasonable, as if separating twins from their mother had been no more significant than reallocating funds. You gave one child a proper home, I said slowly, and left the other to carry your disgrace. His eyes snapped to mine. I provided what I thought was appropriate. That sentence did it. Not because it shocked me. By then very little about him could. But because it confirmed exactly who he was, a man who could commit a lifelong theft and still describe it as management. And standing there in his immaculate foyer with my sister beside me and his wife staring at him like she no longer knew the shape of her own life, I realized his fall had already begun. He just didn't know it yet. Part 5. The Fall of the Father Word Count. 1046. Continue. For a moment after my father said it, nobody moved. The house seemed to absorb the silence differently than the wedding hall had. There was no crowd here to witness it, no clinking glasses, no polished laughter rushing in to cover what had been said. Just the low hum of the refrigerator from somewhere in the kitchen, the ticking of a long case clock in the hallway, and the sound of Vivian trying to breathe through whatever had just cracked open inside her. I don't understand, she said at last. Her voice was small. Smaller than I would have thought possible from a woman who had spent decades standing beside a man like Robert Harlan. She looked from him to Clara, then to me, then back to the papers on the entry table, as if they might rearrange themselves into something less monstrous if she stared hard enough. Robert, she said again, what is she talking about? He still did not look at her. That more than anything made me believe she had not known the full story. A man like my father only avoids eye contact when the lie has become too large to manage. Clara turned toward Vivian, and when she spoke, her voice had changed. It had softened not with forgiveness, but with grief. It means, she said, that I was born to another woman, Louise Whitaker, June's mother. It means I wasn't adopted by strangers. I was taken from my own family and brought into yours." Vivian let out a sound that was almost a laugh, except there was no humor in it at all. Just disbelief trying to defend itself. "No," she said. "No, that can't be right. Robert, tell them. Tell them there's some mistake." My father straightened his shoulders. "It was a legal arrangement," he said. "Everything was handled properly." Properly. I had heard enough of that word from men in suits to know how much evil it could hide. Vivian stared at him. "You told me her birth was complicated. You told me she stopped pressing a hand to her chest. You told me the records were delayed because of the county office." He said nothing. She stood up too quickly, one hand grabbing the arm of the chair to steady herself. "Did you lie to me?" Now he looked at her, but not with remorse, with irritation. "Vivian, lower your voice." I almost laughed again. There it was, the instinct to manage tone when truth could no longer be managed. Clara stepped forward before I could. "No," she said. "You lower yours. For once in your life you answer plainly." He turned on her then, and I saw the old authority come back into his face, the one that had likely worked on bankers, waiters, board members, and wives. "You will not speak to me that way." "I just did," she replied. There was steel in her now. Not the polished confidence he had raised in her to impress his friends, but something more honest. Something earned in pain. I found to my surprise that I was proud of her. Not because she was brave in some dramatic way, but because she was staying in the room. People underestimate that. Staying is sometimes the hardest thing there is. Vivian turned to me. "Did your mother know?" she asked. I thought of the note, the pleading in it, the sentence that had stayed with me since I first unfolded the paper. "Please don't make me regret believing you." "Yes," I said quietly. She knew enough to grieve. Vivian's face crumpled. She sat down again slower this time, as if her body no longer trusted the floor beneath it. "My God," she whispered. "My God." No one comforted her. Not out of cruelty, but because there are moments when comfort becomes impossible. Truth has to sit where it lands. My father took a step toward the table and placed one hand over the documents like he could reclaim them by touch. "You are making this far more dramatic than it was," he said. "Louise was not equipped to raise 2 children. I provided stability, opportunity, a real future." I looked at him, then really looked. At the pressed shirt, the clipped tone, the complete inability to hear himself, and I understood something that came too late to help my mother, but right on time to save me. He had never seen people as people when they stood in the way of the story he wanted told. He saw them as obstacles, liabilities, variables to manage. "You keep talking like you purchased a better sofa," I said, "not a child." That hit him harder than shouting would have. His eyes narrowed. "Watch your tone." "No," I replied. "I've done that all my life. I'm finished." The room went still again. And then, because I had not come all this way just to expose him, I said the thing I had been carrying for more than 60 years. "You called me a bastard child in front of a room full of people," I said. "Do you know what that costs a child? Do you know what it does to grow up under a name like that while you sit in church and shake hands and donate money and pretend you are respectable?" His jaw tightened, but I kept going. "My mother worked herself to the bone while you built a legacy. I was mocked at school, whispered about in grocery stores, looked at with pity in church pews, and all the while you had the nerve to decide that one daughter was fit for the front porch and one belonged in the shadows." Clara turned to me, then tears standing in her eyes. I almost stopped, but not because of him. Because I finally understood that I wasn't speaking only for myself anymore. "You didn't save Clara," I said. "You separated sisters, you robbed a mother, you rewrote a life because the truth embarrassed you." Vivian covered her mouth. My father's face went hard. "That is enough." "No," Clara said beside me, "it isn't." She moved to stand closer, shoulder nearly level with mine. It was the first time in our lives we had ever stood that way. Together. "You taught me to be proud of this family," she said to him. "Do you understand what you've done? Every story you told me about who I was, every birthday, every memory, every photograph, now I have to ask what was real and what was staged." His expression flickered then, not much, but enough. He had not expected her loyalty to move. He had counted on it. "Clara," he said, trying a different tone now, lower and almost gentle, "I raised you." She nodded once. "Yes, you did. and now I have to live with Hao. It was the closest thing to a strike I had ever seen land on him. He looked older suddenly, not frail, not broken, but diminished. A man whose authority had depended on everyone agreeing not to inspect the foundation too closely. Then he turned to me with something I recognized instantly: calculation. "What is it you want?" he asked. There it was, the language he understood best. Transaction, settlement, terms. For a second, the younger woman inside me, the one who had once written that unanswered letter at 17, rose up with every possible answer. "I want your apology. I want your shame. I want your name dragged through every room you ever stood in with pride." But age gave me something better. I looked him straight in the eye. "I want nothing from you," I said. That landed deeper than any demand could have. His face changed not to remorse but to confusion. Men like him know how to defend against hunger. They do not know what to do with freedom. Clara drew a shaky breath beside me. Vivian lowered her eyes. And in that moment, I realized revenge had already done its real work, not by destroying him, but by releasing us from needing him to become decent before we could become whole. I reached for the papers and closed the file. "We're leaving," I said. Clara looked at me startled for half a second, then nodded. My father did not stop us. Neither did Vivian. When we stepped back out onto the front walk, the evening air felt colder than before, but cleaner too. Clara stood beside me under the porch light, holding herself like someone who had just walked out of one life and had no idea what the next one was supposed to look like. I understood that feeling better than most. "Well," I said softly, "now comes the hard part." She looked at me. "What's that?" I thought of my mother, of all she had endured, of all we had lost. And then I answered with the only truth I had left. "Figuring out what we do with each other." Part 6. Reckoning and Reconciliation, Word. Count 1043. Continue. In the weeks that followed, life didn't return to normal. It became something quieter, something more deliberate. Clara called me 2 days after we left my father's house. Not late at night, not in a panic, but mid-morning, like someone beginning a routine they were still learning how to trust. "Would you like to have lunch?" she asked. I looked at my kitchen clock, the same one that had marked every ordinary hour of my life, and felt something unfamiliar settle into place. "Yes," I said, "I would." We chose a small cafe in town. Nothing fancy. Soup of the day sandwiches, coffee served in thick white mugs. The kind of place where no one cares who you used to be. When she walked in, she didn't look like the woman from the wedding anymore. No pearls, no careful polish. Just Clara. She smiled a little unsure, and I realized we were doing something that should have been simple all along. We were meeting as sisters. It wasn't easy at first. There were pauses. Questions we didn't know how to ask without hurting each other. Stories that overlapped and stories that didn't. We were two lives that had run side by side without touching, suddenly trying to map where they met. But slowly, very slowly, it began to feel less like effort and more like recognition. She told me about her childhood private schools, piano lessons, vacations that looked perfect in photographs. But she also told me about the pressure, the expectations, the way our father had shaped everything into something that had to be presented, never simply lived. "I always felt like I was being watched," she said once, "even when I was alone." I understood that in a different way. "I always felt like I was being measured," I replied, "and never quite adding up." We sat with that for a while. Then she reached across the table just briefly and touched my hand. "Maybe neither of us was the problem," she said. That sentence stayed with me. Weeks turned into months. We met regularly. Coffee lunch walks in the park when the weather allowed. We shared photographs, mine worn at the edges, hers carefully preserved in albums. We laughed more than I expected. We cried less than I thought we might. Grief, it turns out, doesn't always come in storms. Sometimes it settles like a quiet fog and you learn to move through it together. We visited my mother's grave one Sunday afternoon in early fall. The leaves had just begun to turn soft gold, a little red, the kind of color that makes you think of time in a gentler way. Clara stood beside me holding a small bouquet of white flowers. "I wish I had known her," she said. "So do I replied. She knelt and placed the flowers carefully like she didn't want to disturb anything. "I don't know what she would think of me," she added quietly. I looked at the name carved into the stone, Louise Whitaker. My mother. The woman who had loved us both even when she had been forced to let one go. She would think you were hers, I said. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, and when she opened them again, something had settled in her. Not peace, but belonging. As for my father, we did not go back. He called once, left a message. Something about wanting to discuss matters properly. I didn't return it. Clara didn't either. Some conversations arrive too late to matter. Some apologies, if they ever come, are meant more for the speaker than the listener. And I had spent too many years waiting for him to become someone he had never chosen to be. But I did not carry bitterness the way I once thought I might. That surprised me. I had imagined revenge as something louder, sharper, a moment where the balance of pain shifted visibly from one side to the other. Instead, it came quietly. It came in the form of truth spoken out loud. It came in the moment my father realized he no longer controlled the story. And most of all, it came in the simple, steady presence of the sister I had lost before I ever knew her name. One evening, as Clara and I sat on my back porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, she turned to me and said, "Do you ever wish things had been different?" I thought about it. About the years we didn't have. About the mother we shared but never together. About the childhoods that had been shaped by the same man in completely different ways. "Yes," I said, "of course I do." She nodded. But I added, if everything had been different, we might never have found each other like this. She smiled. "That's true." We sat in comfortable silence after that. The kind that doesn't need filling. The kind that tells you something has finally come to rest. And as I looked out at the fading light, I realized something that I wish I had understood much earlier in life. You don't always get to choose what's taken from you. But you do get to choose what you carry forward. For years I carried shame that didn't belong to me. I carried a name that had been used as a weapon. I carried the absence of a man who never intended to stand beside me. But I don't carry those things anymore. Now I carry truth. I carry my mother's strength. And I carry a sister who, against all odds, found her way back to me. If you're listening to this, wherever you are, whatever your story looks like, I want you to think about the things you've been holding on to. The words someone else used to define you. The silence someone else left behind. The pieces of your past that still feel unfinished. You don't have to keep carrying what was never yours to begin with. And if there's someone out there, someone you've lost, or someone you've never truly known, it may not be too late to reach for them. Sometimes the truth hurts, but sometimes it also leads you home. If this story meant something to you, if it reminded you of someone, or helped you see your own story a little more clearly, share it. Talk about it. And if you'd like to hear more stories like this, you're always welcome to stay a while longer. Because in the end, we're all just trying to understand where we came from and who we choose to be next. The end.